Breaking news from the stadium tonight as an anonymous fan foot the bill for 55,000 hot dogs, bringing that sweet tubed meat to everyone in attendance.
Free dogs! Yeah!
55,000 hot dogs? What does that even cost?
While the identity of this Frankfurter philanthropist remains anonymous, their all-beefy generosity will go down in history.
The new Mega Millions. More to win means more to give. How you spend it is up to you. Yeah!
For game odds and details, visit sceducationlottery.com.
But I think on the whole, like the logician mindset of those PE firms and how to multiply shareholder value is something that most entrepreneurs need to read so they can see it from the other side, and how they can see exiting doesn't have to be, as painful as a process, at least that I went through in the beginning. And I was like, Jess, I hear these stats that, there's 10,000 baby boomers selling their business every day. Sorry, there's 10,000 businesses that are sold by baby boomers every day, and there's going to be 75 million baby boomer exits. And she said, David, those numbers are inflated. A lot of people are using that just as headlines to get people to follow on their social media. But there is a ton of baby boomers that are exiting. I'm a big believer in the spirit of small business. Mm-hmm. And, that vision that is established, whether it's articulated or not, there's that purpose and that vision when that entrepreneur starts their business. I truly believe that that's carried on throughout the business. And when you understand that all businesses are the same in the sense that they're run by people.
Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling. And now a moment for our sponsors. I want to highly recommend you get Acquisition Aficionado magazine. Every month, Acquisition Aficionado magazine brings you tactics for business buying and selling you won't find anywhere else. Learn firsthand from industry leaders who share their success stories, featuring in-depth interviews and stories from leading figures in the business acquisition industry. This multi-platform mobile magazine speaks to acquisition entrepreneurs wherever they are in the journey. And I want you to visit acquisitionaficionado.com today. Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast. Today I'm here with David Miller, and if you don't know this man, this guy has done multiple deals, world traveler, international speaker. Surprised you don't have a dozen books out yet, but man, you've been doing this for a while, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We met a little bit yesterday, and I was reading through your bio, and you've done a lot in this space, and I think there's a lot for us to learn from you, and a lot of experiences you've had that you can share with us. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, man, appreciate it, Ron. Just our short conversation that we had, you having that technical expertise and just super, super intellectual. I'm looking forward to getting into it.
I'm a little bit of a nerd. That's okay. The nerd's a good word in my world. So, man, you've been doing this for quite a while. I always love the origin story. What got you into the space? You've got a background in finance and deals and roll-ups and all the stuff you've done. Kind of what moved you into the space? What kind of intrigued you to get you into mergers and acquisitions?
Yeah, I guess kind of a lighthearted answer, but somewhat truth to it is, in short, a woman. I remember I always wanted to be in business school. Well, I didn't really want to go to college. My mom actually made me fill an application to University of Tennessee, which is where I was born and raised in Knoxville. And so I was watching the TV one day, and CNBC, and Maria Bartiromo came on there, very attractive Italian woman. And she just started spitting off all these like financial numbers and what was going on with the markets. And that just that engulfed me, man. And I'm like, wow, she's super attractive. She knows what's going on. And it's an interesting industry. I think I'm going to go in the finance route and see where that takes me with business.
It's a great background to have. A lot of us are coming into this space from being operators of companies, being natural born, entrepreneurs. Like what I call a natural born entrepreneur, people like me. My dad had a painting business. I didn't know anything else. My mom worked side jobs and did all kinds of stuff and always had side gigs. She worked a W-2 job for a while there. My dad had a full-time W-2, but he always had a side gig of some sort. And that's what I thought you're supposed to do. Extra money to go buy that bass boat or, anything my dad ever wanted, you just go paint a few more houses, right? Within reason, of course.
Yeah.
So it was just one of those, it was like everything is achievable through hard work. So that's what I call it. It's like you're a natural born entrepreneur. It's just kind of what you know. It's like that's what your family did. That's what my relatives, all my aunts and uncles own heat and air companies and plumbing and all this other stuff. So I was just used to, that's what people do, right? But to grow up and outside of that environment and go the collegiate route, I think one of the best results I've seen out of the groups of people I've interviewed are the guys that went through the finance, right? They went through finance. Maybe they worked for a private equity or a capital company and they evaluated deals. I interviewed a lady yesterday, and that's her route. So it gives you one heck of a basis to stand on, a foundation.
Yeah, I think probably to answer your question and maybe a little bit better, like
Hmm.
I feel like I was made for the financial industry, or at least the financial side of business from the start. I remember whenever I was younger, I had this cardboard box of baseball cards, and my mom got me a Beckett. The For the listeners that don't remember, it was a magazine that valued all the different baseball cards, and I would take all my baseball cards every month and cross-check them with the Beckett value and how it increased or decreased, and track how much money I had in value. And that just intrigued me, like how one card could be 80% of the value of the portfolio, but maybe it wasn't that valuable before, and just the moving dynamics of all those components, how it changes and all that. So yeah, that's kind of how. That's really like the first memory I have of when those financial numbers really started crunching in my head, and I started using finance as an element of creativity versus like the credit and debit, that what I see as more kind of the boring aspect, necessary but boring aspect on the accounting side of things.
So I see you went to your master's degree is from MIT. Now that's impressive in itself, right? What got you to continue the education process? Were you already doing deals by then, or did you have a gap between undergrad and grad school, or?
One of the nonprofits I'm in, Entrepreneurs Organization, it's a global organization, about 18,000 entrepreneurs, about 200 chapters across all the major countries and cities in the world. And one of their values, their core values, is continual learning. And I've always kind of naturally embraced that, even though I'm not a big fan of like going to school, books, going through that process. Finding a way to learn has always kind of been in my system. And, so I graduated from UT as quick as I could. My dad told me, he said, I don't really care what you do, David. Have as much fun as you want as long as you go to class. So that's what I did. Not really wanting to go to college. I made sure I went to class. Never been one that had to study too much. I'm kind of fortunate in that area. But so I went to class and I took the tests and I got out in 3.5 years. And once I got in the real world, I'm like, wow, there's so much more that I still need to learn. So I got my financial planning degree from Oglethorpe while I was working in corporate America. And the best lessons that I learned wasn't through formal education. It was through just screwing up and making mistakes and failing in the small business space, which I've done quite a bit of.
Those stick the best, don't they? You don't forget those lessons as easily, right? So those are the lessons you learn the most, is the ones that sting a bit. It cements it there good in your memory. Most people, listen to this show. They're trying to strive and get to their career to have one good exit. Man, you've done dozens. What clicked in you that you think other people are missing? What do you think that like something clicked along the way? First of all, so take a step back. Even what was your first transaction in the M&A world, and what kind of instigated that? What made you think I'll either buy a company or sell one?
Well, I started my financial company in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And
As everything was like swirling around, 2008 was a rough year.
yeah, nowhere to go but up is the way I
Right,
looked at it,
exactly.
right?
Wow. Yeah.
So, I left corporate America and, I had a non-compete and all that. So I had to do everything from scratch. And the market was dead. And getting out there and educating people on investments and having them give you money, especially me being in my 20s, it's like you have someone who's, 50, 60, 70 that's, has several $1,000,000. Like, why am I going to give some young person their money? I was able to build trust and get quite a bit of clients that way. But at the end of the day, I always reverted back to banks and like, why are they so successful, at least from a stability and financial growth standpoint? And it's all about leverage. You give a bank $1 and they, for lack of better words, leverage that out 21 times,
Mm-hmm.
and the amount of money that they're able to make on that. So whenever I said, hey, and I did my first small deal, I bought a lady's company that, had been in the industry for about 30 years. She wanted to retire and have a horse farm. And, I did a seller finance note with, I think maybe I put 10, 20% down. It was only a couple $100,000 acquisition, but I saw how that leverage and that cash flow yielded exponential returns. And, why not grow off other people's money and other risk? Obviously, you got to deliver results or things are gonna fall apart. But, putting other people's money on the line, enabling you to, increase your cash flow top line and profit thereafter was just kind of a sensible way that I looked at about doing it.
So was your first deal like an SBA loan deal, or was it like all seller finance?
It was all seller financed. I've
Okay.
done a couple million, not that many,
Mm-hmm.
maybe like 4, 5, 6 in SBA 7As.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that first one was seller financed.
And how did you come about that? You just happened to know her, or you seen it posted somewhere, or what was the like? Hey, wait a second, there's something out there I should take a look at.
It was a website for people that were retiring.
Okay.
And she had actually interviewed several people, and Louise was her name. She's an amazing woman. But she taught me something very, very valuable that I still use today, and it's all about trust. So when I went in there, the first thing she said to me were all these like very critical, cynical, fact finding questions, but there was a lot of curiosity with it. And after we got through that first stage, she said, David, I talked to, I won't say the gentleman's name.
With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
I talked to this other person, and there are other people in our industry, and they were way more successful than me, had been in the business a lot longer. And she's like, but, I think that you have your heart's in the right place. So I'm like, okay, well, trust is the most important currency in this industry and in business. So if I can convey the amount of trust that I have with someone that I'm doing business with, and they get a sense of that, then that's ultimately going to be one of the material components to facilitate the deal.
Absolutely. Almost every deal, when I help people analyze, in our groups and stuff that we have, and something went sideways, it was usually because they failed to build trust and rapport, right? They started asking for financials or tax returns before they really had deep rapport, especially when they go through brokers and stuff. They go through the broker, and they'll talk for a while. Maybe they've had 4 or 5 calls with the broker, exchange stuff. They meet the seller one time and want to do an LOI, and the next thing in there, in a 30-minute call with the seller, they're starting to ask, well, I need your last 3 years of tax returns. The guy doesn't quite trust you yet here. There's got to be, at least especially in this day where we do everything via Zoom and nobody got a handshake, nobody even got a vibe of being around you. There's got to be some more in-depth conversations in that, right? If I ever teach a course, which I used to teach real estate courses and stuff like that, if I ever do another one, if I ever do a course product whatsoever, it'll be not on mergers and acquisitions, or it'll be on building trust and rapport with with anybody, because I think it's such a critical skill in life.
Yeah, I was talking to one of my colleagues, one of my MIT classmates this morning, and she's in the M&A space. And I was like, Jess, I hear these stats that, there's 10,000 baby boomers selling their business every day. Sorry, there's 10,000 businesses that are sold by baby boomers every day, and there's going to be 75 million baby boomer exits. And she said, David, those numbers are inflated. A lot of people are using that just as headlines to get people to follow on their social media. But there is a ton of baby boomers that are exiting. And she said, there used to be, for at least with her network, there used to be, for every acquisition that was posted for sale, there used to be maybe 30 to 40 inquiries. She's like, there's as many as 2 to 3, sometimes 400 inquiries. So that filtration process is even more rigid. And, if that element of trust is there, then, or is not there, then it's going to be hard when you're competing with a lot of people wanting to buy businesses.
Yeah. 2007, 2008 and stuff, when you and I graduated, my MBA was in 2007, I believe. I'm a little older than you. I skipped a bunch of years between my undergrad and I went back to my MBA. I got to the point in my career as a senior director of operations and tech that if I wanted to get the VP title, I figured out I needed to learn how to play golf or go back to school and get an MBA, and it seemed less time consuming and less expensive to freaking get another degree, so I went back to school. But that whole process there, of doing deals and doing rapport and stuff is so critical, and there's so many people now. The difference is 2008, 2009, I don't remember, maybe one class they brought it up a little bit, and I have a master's degree in business and marketing. You'd think they'd teach me all about mergers and acquisitions because it's a hell of a way to grow. But back then it was just the Ivies doing ETA, entrepreneurship through acquisition. Now, it's done, almost all kinds of schools are popping up with these programs. You see even lower tier in like community colleges are starting to have classes about buying a company instead of, starting one. And so that's there. And then you have a group of, ex-real estate investor gurus are now teaching it. They taught real estate investing or wealth building through other avenues, and now they bought their first company, and now they're teaching acquisitions through, growth through acquisition too. So I think the market of people doing it is 10 times what it used to be when you and I were in college, or if not 100 times more. Not all of them belong there.
Yeah, that's where, and this with your military background, that's where that grit and resilience comes into play. Whenever the market appears flooded and it's a red ocean type environment, then, if that grit and resilience discipline factor is not there, then good luck.
Yeah. I know hands down, if I talk to a business owner and 50 other people talk to the business owner, at the end of the day, the business owner and I will still be friends, right? When I sit down with a business owner and anybody I coach or mentor in the space, and I tell them the same thing. When you sit down with a business owner, at the end of the day, you're trying to figure out what their biggest problem is and if you're capable of solving it. And if you're not capable of solving it, hopefully you know somebody that is, and you offer them an opportunity to work with that person. And as long as you do that, if you always have the other person's interest in mind, a lot of times the biggest obstacle a business owner that thinks he wants to sell isn't, can you buy the company? A lot of times, especially in the early stages, a lot of times have the other person's interest in mind. He needed to stop doing some of the stuff he hated and bring people in to do that stuff. And I explained to him, so once you have this ready to sell, you may not want to sell it. Once you have it ready to sell and it's well managed and it doesn't depend on you and not everybody's bringing all the drama to you, it'll be running well enough. You can take a month vacation or a 2 months vacation, you come back and you're making more money than you left. That's the indication it's ready to sell. And at that point, you're only doing the things you love. You may not want to get rid of it. You're only, I think, like 42. Like, you may want to hang around with that thing, right?
Yeah, I agree. And there's a lot of hype and just emotional excitement built up around people selling their companies. But, after you sell a company and that check comes and hits your bank account, sure, it feels good, but that moment is a very short period of time. And like one of the hardest, at least for me in my experience, one of the hardest things and arts that's required in building business is, like you said, who, not how. You don't have to know how to do everything. You need to find the people who are capable of doing it. And you get those people in place, that's a process that takes a while. So once your machine's running and it's well oiled, why not keep it cash flowing? Why not keep taking the profit? Why not, keep having fun, especially if you've learned how to delegate and all that. And, someone comes along and says, hey, we'll give you stupid money for what you have, then definitely worth entertaining that a little more seriously,
Absolutely, right. And I'm a big fan of that Dan Sullivan's book, Who Not How. Have you read the book? Yeah.
Yeah, I like his follow-on one too. 2x is, or 10x is easier than 2x.
I've got that in my read, and I've got a ton of books in my Audible to listen to when I'm at the ocean. But I like to take an Audible book and go for a drive, go up to the coast because I'm about 12 miles from there, and go sit at the ocean and listen to a book or meditate or whatever. But it's in the list there. Another one is on another book I'm looking at. I think it's on the I forget what the process now. It's called The Goal Process of an Ongoing Improvement. It's called I forgot the something theory. I forget what it's called now. I'll give it in a minute. But yeah, I honestly, that's probably the biggest changes I've made in my adult career is that book. I stumbled across that book and I realized I'm trying to do all this stuff myself, right? And sometimes when things get stuck, the best thing to do is just step back and go, who it would be, who loves doing this part, who would be just great at it. And a friend of mine always says, somebody else's 80% is way more valuable than your 100%. So if they can get 80%, if they can get it 80% to the way you would have done it, that's a lot more valuable than you doing it 100% your way, because now you have all your time back and you can focus on something that's more important.
And how you actually do that for your listeners out there, Ron, and what I've experienced is like with small business owners, you build something from scratch, right? It's your baby.
Mm-hmm.
You have, whether people want to admit it or not, especially men, us being a little bit more masculine, like you have some very, very deep emotional attachment to your business. So just saying, oh yeah, in theory, this person is better at doing this than me, I just need to find them, put them in place. Well, the emotional process that I've seen for myself and then other businesses that I've advised is that they want to do that, but they have this level of control around them, not because they're control freaks, but because they have built something and they built this emotional resonance around them, and actually letting go of that control and allowing others to do it without pissing them off, it's something that's hard. And, what I found is when I was actually able to let go of the control, I was, and watching someone else do it, I was actually better at them in doing it in the beginning, but me being more of a visionary versus an operator, I'm kind of in the middle on it.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say I'm on one end of the spectrum, but handing operator type duties over to someone that's really their logician mind is way more focused on that than I am. They quickly became better at doing those duties than I did.
Mm-hmm.
I was definitely more adept and better at it from the beginning. But then once I handed it over, allowed them to do it their way, even though it wasn't as efficient of mine in the past, then they did it and they started doing it and doing it and doing it. And next thing you know, it's like, wow, why didn't I do this sooner?
Absolutely. Like even in this podcast, when this first podcast came out, I edited everything, did everything myself, and I brought on a virtual assistant to help schedule and stuff. And one day I was just kind of getting falling behind, and I asked her, so would you like to learn how to edit videos? She goes, oh, I'd love to. I always want to learn how to do that. So I gave her 4 or 5 YouTube videos, and I gave her an episode. And I said, here's 3 or 4 YouTube videos that teach you how to use it. And this is before Descript and some of the cool tools that made it easy. And she did the first one. We had to go back and forth a couple times on it. By the time she was doing her 3rd or 4th one, it was better than I was doing, right? And now with all these extra tools, she cranks them out, and I don't, I pretty much just get on the mic. Everything else is a machine, right? She schedules things. She picks out really cool people. Like I got on the call with you yesterday. I didn't even know who you were, and I should have looked you up a little bit. But I was doing calls. I had 10 minutes in between calls yesterday. So Tuesdays are usually my busiest day. So I jumped on. I was like, okay, who the hell are you? Why are we on this call? And you were really kind and gracious to tell me who you are, what you've done, and I was like, okay, this is really cool. But I've automated this to the point where I just get on the mic and talk to really cool people, and then I hand it over to her, and she does the rest.
That's awesome.
Now, something clicked in you because, like a lot of people, they do one deal, they make some money, and they're good. You've been doing this for a while, and across multiple industries. I'm looking up at the notes. Looks like cannabis to clean energy. Do you have something in my notes said fashion? Is that a mistake? Or no, you got something in that space too? So talking about a breadth of different things, right? Is there a common thread across all of them other than finance?
There's not, other than I believe that the small business space has, I'm a big believer in the spirit of small business. And, that vision that is established, whether it's articulated or not, there's that purpose and that vision when that entrepreneur starts their business. And I truly believe that that's carried on throughout the business. And when you understand that all businesses are the same in the sense that they're run by people, who knows how the artificial intelligence is gonna adapt.
That's the first thing that popped in my
that.
mind. Like, oh, how that's gonna last, right? Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there's going to be automations and technologies to help support us, but at the end of the day, people are what move the needle. And if you can build a good team, the world's your oyster. And I didn't believe that until I actually went into my second industry, hands on, and what, like you had mentioned, the cannabis space. So, I was in accounting, finance, capital raising, and a service industry. And then I made a just 180-degree pivot into a product, a cultivation and a D2C website distribution in the cannabis space. I mopped the floors, I cleaned the tanks, I lollipopped, I trimmed, I beginning to end from seed to sale to learn how the business was run. But once I understood the different components of the business, I'm like, this is the exact same. It's not the exact same. It's very, very similar to what I was doing in this other industry. It's just run a business that has a different purpose.
Yeah, what are you doing, hydroponics? You said something about cleaning tanks. Yeah.
Yeah, it was about 90% of it. We did have a living soil room.
Yeah.
But most of it was flood and drain. We had deep water culture. We had top drip. A lot of different methods, but mainly it was flood and drain and top drip.
So you grew that business and then you ended up, exiting? Did you sell it?
In the process of exiting.
Okay.
So, but I haven't been involved other than on the board for over a year now.
So, what are the other industries that you did so that everybody else knows? I read your bio. I know what they are, but what are some of the other industries you've done roll-ups in?
Well, the finance and the cannabis space were two of the big ones. More so the finance than the cannabis, but I mean, there've been a lot of different industries. Which one are you interested in, Ron?
I'd seen the fashion. What is it talking about fashion? You buy a fashion company or something, or you build one?
So I did not build one. That's one that I am an investor in. I was a seed investor in, and they do fashion through junk. The company's actually called Junk Couture. The founder's from Ireland, and his whole purpose is he wants to turn fashion into a sport for those that aren't inclined, aren't the sports type. So, and he wasn't necessarily a big sports person, and he felt like that you can still. He knew that you could still be ultra competitive even if you didn't play sports.
Right.
So what they do is, and they've partnered with some of the big top accounting firms and credit card, like some really big sponsors across the globe, and they'll have these huge events in Paris, New York, Dubai, and these children will create fashion, these huge, elaborate, and ornate dresses out of trash. I mean, you look at them, and you're like, wow, this looks like someone at Gucci made, or some very, maybe not Gucci, but a very eclectic type artist. And so they go on the runway and they show their dresses and fashion and stuff. So that's what he's doing. He's turning fashion into a sport.
The one thing that I think we're missing out on, and I don't know if we'll ever adapt to it, is going back to your cannabis industry, is for paper, for many of the products on the planet, including toilet paper and a lot of other things, there's no necessity anymore to ever cut down another tree. Through hemp production and even bamboo and some other stuff we have out there, it could be totally replaced. But yet we don't do it, right? And we still have regulations about growing it in certain places, and it's kind of frowned upon. It makes better clothing than most, most cotton-based products or polyester and all that other stuff too, right? The hippies had it right back in the 60s and 70s with hemp-based products. How do we get back to reusing and getting society to buy in on that, right? There's some people that tried, right? It's just I don't see it taking off.
One of the things that I think will be an integral component is the younger generations, at least from what I've heard and studied, is they really have a true purpose-driven will inside them whenever they want to work for a company. And if they don't see that there, then they're not going to do it. In many, if not most cases. So you get those younger generations to embrace that entrepreneurial spirit of creating, of innovating, of figuring out new things, then I really think that's how it's going to go. Because these kids are super bright and probably way smarter than us, just from the information they've been able to assimilate through the digital era that we've had over the past 10, 15 years since Facebook really revolutionized it. So they start embracing how they can live purpose-driven lives and be entrepreneurs at the same time, then I think that's how most of our problems are going to get solved, is from those younger generations.
I see on your website and some of the other products you have, you refer to the magic of M&A and turning, or the magic of growth and stuff, and turning the science of M&A into an art, or art into a science. What do you do differently than the rest of the guys? I mean, what is this magic you refer to?
So one of the quotes I have is, growth is a transformation where the unknown becomes your competitive edge. And, a lot of people associate that word magic as a connotation as mysterious, cryptic, misunderstood. And yeah, all that's true. But when you look at it, magic is really something you don't understand, because it's not necessarily a 1 + 1 = 2 situation. So the method is that logic. It's that structure, the systems, the processes, those typical operational type things you need, having a balance with that side. But also, to answer your question on the magic side, it's understanding the 1 + 1 = 3 situations. And that's where creativity comes in, intuition comes in, those where creativity comes in. Those will solve. So does that map over to a small business? That really comes down to, obviously it's on a case-by-case basis with the business that you're working in. But when you get subject matter experts in industries, it comes down to the people. And how does their knowledge, how does that team intel or that team intellect, when they're working together, how can they create magic, i.e. discover the unknown that most of the other, and again, it's not some dark magic that there's some secret formula as the alchemists created back in the day, but it's creating the unknown where, or discovering the unknown where most people, don't understand it, and then just incorporating that into the logic side.
Now, in your coaching, speaking, and stuff like that, is the primary growth strategy you teach, is that through mergers and acquisitions, or you give them, is there something you want a company, is there a process you put a company through before, like that they need to do before they're ready to acquire another one? You need to get your house in order first, or can you just go buy a company?
Yeah, so I use a lot. That's a great question, Ron. I use a lot of different methodologies. There's EOS that's out there, Entrepreneur Operating System. There's Scaling Up through Vern Harnish, which is an amazing, high-level thinking process. There's all kinds of different things out there. But like kind of the basics that a business needs that I feel like need to be in place before you add on that what I call CapEx flex, a capital expenditure flexing, putting that M&A strategy in there. Those building blocks you need are really the strategy, the first one, the people, the execution, and the cash. And you get those components in, the strategy and the people being more of the magic and intuition side, and then the execution, the cash being more the logician or structural side. You get a small business typically in the range of $1 million to $3 to $5 million, obviously depending on the industry and margins and all that. But you get a business in that range and you implement it, when they're in that quote valley of death for small businesses where they're either going to grow or retract and go back into a smaller revenue type range. You implement those systems there and get that in place, then you can really throw on that M&A process in the small business space that will allow you to utilize that leverage and high growth.
That's awesome. And then when do you think a company's ready to exit? Is it, or do you grow these things, you build them really well? If you build them to exit, they're running really well. What's a great indicator to a founder that it's time to start looking, maybe I should sell this?
A lot of that comes down to what's the goal of the founder. Where's his head or her? Where is his or her head at? Where are they in the emotional process? Sometimes the business outgrows the founder, and whether they want to leave or they don't want to leave, is some soul searching. Oftentimes has to be done. At least it was in my case for one of my businesses. Is that if the business has outgrown what you've done, or you're just in a different space where you want to move on, then that's when it needs to exit. Now, whether you're going to get your maximum dollar output, depending on the stage of business that you're in, the profitability, the people that are in place, all that is a totally different question. But when is a good time to exit? I think as long as you're putting the business first, it comes down to, where's the entrepreneur and founder's head at?
People don't get that sometimes. If you look at the VC world and some of the other spaces, if you watch what they do, it's a different skill set and often a different person. They can take a company from idea to first customer, and then first customer to first $1,000, maybe first $1,000 up to the first million and a half. And then there's somewhere in there in between that million and a half, sometimes in the industry, maybe it's $5 to $7 million revenue, that you've kind of outgrown that CEO or that skill set, and he has to either learn and adapt, or it has to be replaced so it can scale, so it can become the 5, 10 million, the 20 million, 30 million. So if you look at the way the VC routes, a lot of people are like, they don't want to sell the VC or work with VCs because they're going to replace me as the founder at a certain point. Well, if you grow right, maybe not. But it is a very common theme to see at certain stages, where they have to pull the leadership out. Even the big companies, if you looked at, I think it was Larry Ellison and his partner on Oracle, right? They stepped away for a while because they realized they've taken Oracle as far as they could take it. And then they went back, got mentored, and worked with the new CEOs and worked with some people, and now they're back, or they were back last time I looked. I guess it's been a while since I looked. But I'm just saying, it takes a lot of internal reflection to know if you've taken it as far as you can take it.
Yeah, that's why I have a lot of respect for some of those CEOs like Tony Hsieh, who was the founder and CEO of Zappos. He ended up exiting and selling to Amazon, but the different emotional leveling up type stages that he had to go through, he could have exited so many times along that path, but it just speaks to his emotional competence, his business acumen, for him to be able to grow from nothing to a 5 million to 10 million, 100 million to $1 billion company. That's a different level of expertise for each of them. And I'll obviously miss some steps along the way, but that's a different level of expertise in how you run those companies. And the ability for someone to do that is obviously rare, but figuring out, hey, if you're at that $100 million stage, then and recognize you don't have the ability to move that next step, there's still great ways to exit. You can still sell and then take a second, third, fourth bite of the apple through PE or whatever method you go to do it right. So it's not necessarily that you have to exit, like leave, but you more so step aside.
take some chips off the table. And if you pick your PE firm right, you're surrounded by mentors and people that will guide you and make sure that you don't fail going on. Sometimes you stay in the same role, and sometimes you're not equipped to be in that role. It's that's a discussion between the seller and the PE firm. But I've interviewed Adam Coffey and some other people who went through multiple steps of that, right? And they got a piece of pie. Exited his company at some 3.4 or 4.3 billion dollars at the end of it, right? There's something to be said for that, to choosing the right people to be around you, the right PE firm, because they can be that bridge. They can put a board of directors in that can give you that insight and knowledge, and say, hey, no, you're heading left. You should probably go a little right now, right? But not everybody. There's something to be said for the people that can do that, because they get out of their own way, right? A lot of times our own ego, especially as guys, we want to do things the way we want to do it because that we think we've got it figured out, and to know that you don't is a very high emotional intelligence level.
Yeah, you mentioned Coffey. Is it Adam Coffey? Is that
Yeah.
the PE playbook? I think he said something along the lines of one of his most successful stints was, obviously it took a lot of building to get up to that, but over a course, maybe it was a year, he had like 3 or 4 8-figure paydays from different businesses that he invested in, over time. And, I feel like that book, the PE playbook says a lot of the good,
Right.
and with it. But I think on the whole, like the logician mindset of those PE firms and how to multiply shareholder value is something that most entrepreneurs need to read so they can see it from the other side, and how they can see exiting doesn't have to be, as painful as a process, at least that I went through in the beginning.
Yeah, I've interviewed him 3 or 4 times. A really cool guy. You can tell it's like you're really laid back, really calm and stuff. We had some major technical difficulties. He had some major technical difficulties in the first time, and as soon as he got his cleared up, I had an internet issue, and he just stayed calm through the whole thing. He cleared out his calendar a little bit. We did the recording after we both got our tech issues solved, and it was the most calm I've seen anybody stay through. Like, a lot of people get frustrated when that happens. He just was laid back, like, oh, we'll fix it, right? And I'm a little nerdy, so I could help walk through some of it. And then as soon as I got his side working, mine started glitching for an internet issue here. And that said, I was really, the guys that I see that are really successful, you, Adam Coffey, and other stuff, they just have a demeanor about them. They've seen enough trauma and stress through business that when something little happens, they're like, yeah, we can get through this, right? You don't take things to heart. You don't get twisted up so much and so fast as some of the newer guys in this space who, well, my system's not working, we'll just have to reschedule. Like, they get frustrated and don't want to go through it. I was like, well, good luck buying a company if you're going to have that mentality of, like, as soon as something gets tight and weird and doesn't work quite right, you go, I'm done. I'll have somebody else look at this, right?
Yeah, for sure. I agree, Ron.
Cool. So we've covered a lot of topics. I feel like we're missing something. I've asked you a lot of questions about the different industries and stuff. What do you think? What do you think I should be asking? What are some of the areas that you love talking about when you're on the stage, when you're out there telling the world about this space and what you do and what you're capable of helping businesses with? What did we not highlight in this conversation?
I think just the component of, and I lied to mention on this earlier, the component of trust when it comes down to everyone that you're working with, everything from hiring an employee to vendor partner relationships that you have in business, to your key employees, the communication rhythm that's involved. That's, what's that quote? It goes like, trust is the glue of life, trust but verify. There's so many different elements of trust that are required in business that, if that component isn't there, then a lot of these philosophical things we've been talking about, or even a lot of the practical things we've been talking about, it'll fall apart. So just making sure that you're understanding how to build trusting relationships, getting things started, really listening to your gut whenever you're approaching something. That's, at least in my experience, that'll through failure and success, that'll save you a lot of headache and heartache down the road.
I tell people that I get people saying, well, how do you build trust? And I said, not by speaking. It's always by listening. The way you build trust is ask people questions and truly listen to them, active listen, really truly listen to what they're saying, and then ask them deeper questions about that. Because as soon as people realize you care, as soon as people realize you want to connect, most people are open to it, right? There are some cultures and some other people may feel like you're being a little nosy or whatever, but most of the time, if you truly are, in a strategic way, empathetic and just want to hear where they're at in life, what are their challenges, what are they trying to accomplish, and to see how I can help you get there, that is the absolute fastest way to build rapport and trust with somebody. A lot of people think they have to spew all their accolades and all their degrees and all that, and that's going to build trust. It usually doesn't. It usually sets off a red flag.
Yeah, I think to that point, one of the quotes that resonates when I heard you was, people don't care about how much they know, don't care about how much you know until they know about how much you care. And that's that emotional component, that magic component that I talked about in the whole M&A and small business and entrepreneur space.
Yeah, it's like you sit down with a business owner, he's thinking about selling, and you just, okay, great, I'm interested in buying. What are all the numbers? You miss the biggest component. I always start with, well, cool, could you tell me about what you built here? And tell me the history of this business. Why did you build this? How did you build this? What are the biggest challenges in it, right? My sense of humor allows me to do things that a lot of people can't do, because people realize that it is a sense of humor. But it's not uncommon for me to go, out of all the people you could be talking to on the phone, what in the hell has you on the phone with a guy that buys and sells companies? You surely have something better to do in your life, right? And I say it differently with a different tonality, but kind of a joking jest. But people will open up. I'm like, well, I'm doing this or that. And one of the things I always do is I go deeper at least 3 times, because whatever they tell you on the surface level, until they know you and have that rapport, probably not the true answer. Like, yeah, we're thinking about retiring, we need the money. And I just simply do the NLP thing, the last 3 questions or last 3 words, and say, retire, need the money, and then they'll tell you a little bit more. And I do the same thing. And after the 1st or 4th depth of it, you'll find the real reason, right? They've got grandkids now, and they want to spend more time with them. They have an illness that they want to take care of, get their health back, all the different stuff. But that trust and rapport comes from asking better questions and truly trying to understand the answer and figuring out if that's the true answer or if there's something underneath it. What have you seen in building trust? Is it different than that, or do you have a different approach to it?
No, I mean, I think, just to expand on what you said, I agree. The way I frame it is, so there's a Harvard study that came out that I was supported in the Inc. article that was released recently that I talked in, and 70% of mergers and acquisitions fail. And so I was thinking about that. It's like, well, how do we break that down? There's a lack of trust is at the heart of it, but where does that lack of trust fall in? And there's 6 key components that I've created, and I'm sure others have as well. This is just how I frame it, of what you're actually buying in an acquisition or a merger. And none of this has to do with the money. Like, yes, you're buying cash flow, you're buying profit, all that, but what are the non-tangible factors? And the first one is time. So you can't create that in almost anything else that you do. You're buying time in an acquisition. You're buying customers is the second one. The third one is A players, hopefully A players and not B or C players, but you're buying A players in acquisition as long as you're doing your diligence right. You're buying cross-selling opportunities. You're buying OpEx efficiencies. And one of the most important things of all those is you're buying team intel. So when you look at all 6 of those components, if trust is broken down with the customers, with the A players, with the team intel, trying to integrate those OpEx efficiencies, trying to cross-sell to customers, selling them something different, if that trust component isn't there or is broken down, then that M&A situation is going to fall apart in a lot of situations. And that's why I think 70% M&As fail. That business and fail is a relative term, right? It may be that, they had $1 million in revenue and they go to $500,000 in revenue. So they're going to have to make cuts and that business goes elsewhere, and deservingly so it does. So it's all about understanding that trust within those different components of when you buy a business.
What are some of the trust disruptors in mergers and acquisitions? The reason they fail is some because the trust was there with the previous owner, most likely, or they wouldn't be succeeding and they wouldn't have been bought. And then you acquire it, and that's a little bit of distrust because of the unknown. But there are some things we can do as mergers and acquisitions people that truly disrupt that trust. And what do you? In my mind, I have some of them, pinned out. But what are some of the things that you think a lot of these guys are doing right off the bat, or too soon, that further betray the trust of the unknown, right? So they don't know whether or not they trust this new buyer. It might have been one of their competitors, and they've been trained for the last 10 years not to trust that. That's the big bad, those guys are trying to take us out, and they just acquired us. Other than that, what do you think causes a lot of this?
Just a lot of the basics, and understand the business and what runs the business, which is customers and which is employees. So what are some of the mistakes that are made? Not prioritizing culture fit, not integrating culture. That's a big deal. Whatever even some of the smaller companies I initially bought, we were only adding on 1 or 2 employees. It took time, and they were, a lot of them were great employees. It took time to integrate them into our culture. And so if you're not prioritizing that, how they're operating, then you're not going to get the economies of scale. Another mistake that I think is made is you don't, and one of the mistakes that I made is, at least with my 5th acquisition, I went too big. It was a leveraged buyout, and we had a lot of fortunate things happen in that transaction to where we kept well above 25% net margins, but we lost $1 million plus in revenue because it was a leveraged buyout. We were too small to, and for the listeners that don't know, a leveraged buyout is simply using debt to buy a company that's larger than yours, which puts a lot of risk on the balance sheet. But so that was the ego of myself as the entrepreneur. It's like, oh, I saw this big picture vision of what we could accomplish, but I really should have bought a smaller company in that same situation. So starting small for entrepreneurs allows them to look at all those different moving components of mergers and acquisitions. So their mistakes that they will make, because those will happen, especially in your first acquisition, you can mitigate your risk. So whenever you're facing issues like how do you align the goals from the previous company to the last, how do you prioritize culture fit, how do you map out that timed integration of communicating with the customers, to making sure you have an ENPS score, that net promoter score, for the employees and the customers to make sure that the integration's going well. I went kind of down a rabbit hole there, Ron. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it went there.
Answer your question.
It did answer the question, and I honestly think one of the biggest core components, the underlying all that, is change. Right? We're so resistant to change as human beings. There's entire sections of libraries written, on change management and who moved my cheese and stuff. That being bought by another company is a big change anyway. I think we rush in as acquisition entrepreneurs. I think we rush in a little too gung-ho sometimes, start making changes before we understand their culture and how their culture fits in, before we understand like what their real problems are and what the employees' perception of those problems are, right? I think the smartest thing that a lot of companies should do is buy a company and then observe it for a little while, and then sit down with all the employees and see what their needs are and what they think, what their perception of the biggest changes need to be made, and see where that overlaps with the ones need to be made, and start with those. Because then you're doing something the customer, or the employees of that new company, they thought needed to be done anyway. You build rapport and trust because you change some things they've been wanting to change for years, and then eventually when you get down to your list of stuff you also need to be changed, they might be a little more open to it because you tackled the big items that were on their mind. They feel heard and vindicated for all the times they've been trying to get those other things changed. I think we change things too fast, and I've interviewed a lot of people, 300 now, and that's some of them who lost all their employees within the first 3 weeks of buying something because they went and changed everything in day two, right? I think psychologically as humans we're so adverse to wanting to be I wanted to go in and be just like it was yesterday. I don't want it improved. I don't want it worse. I just want to go do what I do. I want to do my job, clock in, and go home. And unfortunately, even the A players sometimes fall into that routine of wanting the same routine. So we disrupt that when we do what we do. There's no way around it other than how do you mitigate that and maintain trust through that disruption.
Yeah, one of the things back to what I was telling you about my dad, and he said, if you go to college, when you go to college, just make sure you go to class. I don't really care what you do after that, but go to class. Mm-hmm. One of the things I learned in my statistics class, remember Dr. Esteban Walker, is, he put that parabola up there. And when you map that statistical principle of the different types of people how they accept change, from the bottom decile, that thin part, you have the pioneers, and then you have the optimists, and then you have the pessimists, and then you have that right side of the parabola, you have the cynics, and how those people are adapting to change. I mean, you change too much, like even your pioneers are going to be like, hey, who are extremely risk averse, right? Mm-hmm. And willing to take on a lot of change. They're going to be like, hey, this is too much. Right. And you take a look at a practical situation with employees, like most of them aren't in that first decile there on that parabola. Well, I mean, you mentioned talking to Adam Coffey and mm-hmm. a lot of other people in that M&A growth space. What do you feel like is like one of the main components that we haven't talked about with all the different people that you've spoken to?
I know there's other side of it too, right? We talk about the people. We talked about the trust. We talk about rapport. We talked about culture and stuff like that. One of the things I think, and we talked about you talked about a leverage deal. One of the things I think that people need to iron in their head is they're taking a company that they're buying, and unless they have a full 100% cash down, they're laying debt and some type of debt coverage and debt, a financial burden onto that company it's never had before. Right, there it hasn't had in a long time, and now you have to figure out how does it handle that pressure, right? Especially if you don't really analyze that company and understand that all companies have cycles, and you're playing a game of if you bought it in an up cycle and you did your debt to income ratios and everything, you think you're fine, and all of a sudden you get a down cycle and everything's really super lean. What are you going to do? Right, so understanding the cycles of business and understand that you're layering something on top of that company that when you're stressed out because the employees feel it. When the company's stressed out and has to make certain numbers because they have certain bills to pay, it affects every level of that company. Right, so just making sure that there's enough margins and enough breathing room to where it's not affecting it to a level that's detrimental. I see too many people go out and they leverage themselves to a hilt to buy a company, and the company, it pays a little bit of profit. They're going to take themselves a salary if everything goes the way it's going now. That's the other one I would say just really got to look out for.
Yeah, that's a good point. I wasn't in the business world at this time, but from what I've studied and the little that I've heard, I think it was in the 80s when there were a lot of or maybe early 90s when a lot of those LBOs were going on. Is their pro formas were, hey, what if things go just average? Not even, hey, if things go great, what if things go average? They didn't factor in, like you said, where is a business in the life cycle? And that's something that you really don't know when you're buying a business, is like where you may have a sense given multiples on EBITDA and all that, but industries are changing all the time, and those numbers are moving targets. So if you think that you're buying at a downtime and it's really kind of in the middle or even on the top end, you better make sure your pro forma can sustain cash flow of a 30, 40, 50% downturn, or that's going to take control of you.
We are running out of time, man. I looked up, I didn't even realize how much time. We're at an hour and 15 minutes here. So,
oh, wow.
3 key takeaways. Let's just do this. I think we're at a good spot. We've covered a lot of stuff. If somebody can only walk away remembering 1 or 2, maybe 3 things from this show today, what would you want them to remember?
Method and magic equals alchemy.
Method and magic equals alchemy. Okay. And then how do people reach out to you, man? You're an incredible guy. If somebody wants to work with you or have you speak at one of their conferences and stuff, what is the best way to contact you?
just davidmiller.buzz, and that's my Instagram handle. Just DM me there.
Okay. davidmiller.buzz?
Yep.
Oh, cool. All right. Well, people know how to get a hold of you now. I'll put the information you gave me in the show notes too, and so we'll make sure that's that for the people. Any last words before we say goodbye to everybody?
No, Ron, I appreciate your time, and I'm in the M&A world and buying companies and advising companies on how to grow. So if you have any opportunities, let me know, and I'll certainly do the same for you if you tell me what you're looking for.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We'll call that a show, and hold on for a few seconds.
Having a life scholarship and being able to afford to go to college made me feel inspired to go.
When I got a life scholarship, it was such a relief.
I knew that I wanted to have an impact. Having a life scholarship through the SC Education Lottery was huge. It gave me the opportunity to make that impact right here at home.
The South Carolina Education Lottery. A better you, a better us, a better South Carolina. Visit sceducationlottery.com/betteryou.